Rain washes blood into the sewer. Helen pulls the heavy obsidian ring from the dying man's finger. "Don't call the police," he whispers. Behind them, flashlights cut through the dark. If she stays, she loses everything. Why is he smiling? Some build power with money. Others build it with fear. I am Alfred. I tell stories of the shadows, the streets, the silence, and the wars, where influence is stronger than weapons. Subscribe and walk with me. The Iron District smells of wet rust. It is a place the city forgot, but Chairman Gwyn remembers. He wants the land. He uses debt like a knife, cutting families out of their homes. Helen Dickson stands at her window. Her brother is sleeping on the couch. The eviction notice is taped to the door. It is a red-inked reminder of her struggle. Tonight the streetlights are flickering. Helen takes the back stairs to avoid the landlord. In the alley she trips over a body. A man in a sharp, expensive suit lies in the dirt. He is covered in glass and deep cuts. He looks like a fallen king. Helen hears the heavy boots of men approaching. They aren't doctors, they are cleaners. She has two choices: run and survive, or reach out and change her world. She grabs the man's hand. The obsidian ring is cold against her skin. The rain did not fall in the Iron District. It drummed like a warning. Helen Dickson pulled her coat tighter as she hurried toward her apartment building. She was thinking about her brother Marcus and the overdue electricity bill when a flash of silver caught her eye. In the mouth of a narrow, trash-filled alley, a man slumped against a rusted dumpster. He wore a suit that cost more than Helen made in a year, but it was ruined by dark, spreading stains. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Helen hesitated. In this neighborhood, looking away was how you stayed alive. But when the man opened his eyes, they weren't filled with fear. They were cold, sharp, and observant, even as he bled. "Help," he whispered, his voice like gravel. Before she could think, Helen grabbed his arm. He was heavy, but she was used to hard work. She draped his arm over her shoulder and guided him through the back entrance of her building. They reached her small third-floor apartment just as the sound of heavy tires screeched on the pavement below. Inside, she lowered him onto her worn sofa. Marcus was asleep in the next room, unaware of the stranger in their home. Helen moved with practiced speed, grabbing a first-aid kit. As she cut away his silk shirt to reach a deep-side wound, she noticed a heavy, obsidian ring on his finger. It looked like a piece of dark glass, smooth and strange. "Don't call the police," the man said, his eyes tracking her every move. "If you do, we both die." Suddenly, the hallway outside echoed with the sound of heavy boots. Through the peephole, Helen saw three men in black suits. They moved with a military precision that chilled her blood. They were checking doors, their faces expressionless. "Where is he?" one shouted, his voice muffled by the wood. Helen turned off the lights. She sat on the floor, her back against the door, holding her breath. The men paused outside. She saw their shadows flicker under the door frame. They were looking for a body to dispose of, a dead man in an alley. They didn't expect a ghost in a quiet apartment. After a long minute, the footsteps faded. The hunters moved to the next floor. Helen looked at the stranger. He wasn't wincing from the pain. Instead, he had reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim, high-tech phone. His fingers moved across the screen with clinical speed. "They think I'm a corpse," he murmured, the light of the screen reflecting in his dark eyes. "That is their first mistake." While the men in suits searched the physical world, Kang was already inside their digital lives. He wasn't just hiding, he was hunting. The sun rose over the Iron District, but the light struggled to pierce the thick morning fog. Inside the small apartment, Helen Dickson had barely slept. She sat in the kitchen, watching the man on her sofa. Kang was awake now. He didn't look like a victim anymore. Despite the bandages around his ribs, he sat upright with a terrifying, calm energy. "The laptop," Kang said. His voice was cold, stripped of any emotion. "And I need a secure line. Your internet is monitored by the local provider which Gwyn owns. I need a bypass." Helen felt a chill. He knew about Chairman Gwyn. Everyone in the district knew that name, but people only spoke it in whispers. She handed him her old, dented laptop. It was the only thing of value she owned besides her brother's medicine. "Why do you need this?" Helen asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Those men are still outside. They are looking for you." Kang didn't look up. His fingers began to fly across the keys with a speed Helen had never seen. "Let them look for a body. While they search the streets, I am searching their pockets." He plugged the obsidian ring into the laptop's port. The screen flickered, and suddenly, rows of complex data and glowing maps filled the room with a blue light. Kang wasn't looking at social media or news. He was looking at numbers, millions of them. "This is an audit," Kang murmured. "Gwon thinks he is powerful because he owns the land, but land is just a place to stand. Money is the air he breathes." Helen watched as Kang opened a series of encrypted files. These were Gwon's offshore accounts, hidden deep within banks that the law couldn't touch. To the world, Gwon was a successful businessman. To Kang, he was a series of digital errors waiting to be corrected. "See this," Kang pointed to a shifting graph. "Every time he evicts a family in this district, a payment moves to a shell company in the islands. He isn't just building towers. He is hiding a debt that would crush him if the banks found out." The power shift was silent but total. In the alley, Kang had been a dying man. Now, in a cramped apartment smelling of cheap coffee, he was a predator. He was tracking the flow of every dollar Gwon owned. He was finding the one loose thread that, if pulled, would cause the chairman's entire empire to unravel. Helen realized then that she wasn't just hiding a man. She was hosting a war. The next morning, the pressure began. It didn't start with a gunshot or a broken window. It started with a crisp, white envelope slid under Helen's door. It was a notice from Mr. Henderson, the landlord. The monthly rent had doubled, effective immediately. There was no explanation, only a stamp from Chairman Gwon's legal firm at the bottom of the page. "He knows you are here," Helen whispered, her hands shaking as she showed the paper to Kang. Kang did not look surprised. He was still staring at the laptop, his face pale but determined. "He doesn't know for sure. He is squeezing the building to see who screams. It is a system test. He wants to see who is hiding something they can't afford to keep." By noon, the squeeze tightened. Helen's phone buzzed. It was a short, cold email from the architecture firm where she worked as a junior technician. They were letting her go. No reason was given, but she knew the truth. Gwon's influence was like a fog that could settle over any office in the city. With one phone call, she had been blacklisted. She was now a woman with no income, a sick brother, and a rent bill she could never pay. "I lost my job," Helen said, sitting at the small kitchen table, her eyes filled with tears. "He is taking everything, my home, my work, everything." She looked at Marcus, who was coughing in the other room. The fear was a physical weight in her chest. This was how Gwon won his battles. He didn't use soldiers, he used the law and the banks. He turned the world into a cage until his victims begged to be let out. Kang finally closed the laptop. He looked at Helen, his dark eyes showing a flicker of something that might have been respected. "He is using the system to crush you because he thinks you are weak. He thinks the law belongs to him because he wrote the checks." Kang reached out and tapped the obsidian ring sitting next to the computer. "But the system is just a machine made of numbers, and I am the one who built the code." The power had shifted again. Gwon was using his public strength to harass a single woman, but he didn't realize he was attacking the very person who held the key to his destruction. Helen felt the fear turn into a cold, hard spark of anger. "What do we do?" she asked. "We stop playing by his rules," Kang replied. The decision felt like lead in Helen's stomach. To save Marcus and keep Kang hidden, she had to do something she never thought herself capable of. Kang had identified the weak point. Mr. Henderson, the landlord, was not just a greedy man. He was a terrified one. He was helping Gwon because he was hiding years of unpaid taxes and building safety violations. If you want to stop the squeeze, you have to cut the line, Kang said, his voice flat. Mr. Henderson is the finger Gwon is using to press down on you. Break the finger. Helen's hands shook as she opened the city's master server using the bypass Kang had created. She found the files. They were filled with red flags, hazardous mold reports that had been ignored, and structural cracks in the basement that had been covered with cheap paint. If she leaked these, the building would be condemned. Families would lose their homes, and Mr. Henderson would go to jail. If I do this, everyone in this building suffers, Helen whispered. People who have lived here for 20 years will have nowhere to go. Gwon is already taking their homes, Kang reminded her. The difference is, if you do this now, you control the timing. You take away Gwon's local pawn. Helen looked at Marcus. He was pale, his small chest heaving with every breath. She needed the electricity to stay on for his nebulizer. She needed the door to stay locked. With a single, blurred motion, she hit the upload button. She sent the anonymous tip to the city's highest housing authority and CC'd the local news stations. The reaction was instant. Within 2 hours, sirens filled the street. Building inspectors and news crews swarmed the lobby. Mr. Henderson was led out in handcuffs, shouting about a mistake. In the chaos, the eviction notices were frozen by a court order. The system that Gwon used to harass Helen was suddenly jammed by its own bureaucracy. But as Helen watched her neighbors standing on the sidewalk in tears, clutching bags of clothes, the guilt felt like a physical weight. She had saved her brother, but she had burned the bridge for everyone else. She had made a ruthless choice. She was no longer just a victim of the system. She was now a player in a dangerous game. Kang watched her from the shadows of the living room. You feel the weight of it, he noted. That is good. It means you understand the cost of winning. The next morning, the apartment was eerily quiet. Outside, the news crews had moved on, but the yellow police tape remained wrapped around the building's entrance. Mr. Henderson was in custody, and for the moment, the eviction was stalled. Helen sat at the small wooden table, staring at the obsidian ring. It sat next to her laptop, dark and heavy, absorbing the gray morning light. It's not just jewelry, is it? Helen asked. Her voice was tired. The guilt of the previous night still hung over her like a shadow. Kang leaned forward, his face pale but his eyes burning with a sharp, cold intelligence. In my world, physical gold is too heavy to carry. This ring is a hardware wallet. It contains the private keys to a digital vault. He reached out and tapped the hidden USB-C port in the ring's bevel. Chairman Gwon is a thief, Helen. He didn't build his towers with honest loans. He used a shadow equity fund. Money moved through hidden accounts to avoid taxes and bypass international laws. This ring holds the proof of every dollar he ever laundered. Helen felt her heart race. She wasn't just holding a stranger's ring. She was holding the legal and financial heart of a criminal empire. If he gets this back, he wins. If the police take it, he goes to jail. If the police take it, Kang corrected her calmly, Gwon's lawyers will have it suppressed in an hour. He owns the courts in this district. No, we aren't going to the police. We are going to his shadow partners. Kang explained the equity trap. Gwon had borrowed billions from investors who didn't exist on paper, men far more dangerous than Gwon himself. If those investors realized Gwon's safety net was gone, they would move to protect their own interests. They would tear Gwon's empire apart from the inside to save themselves. You have his entire net worth in your hand, Kang said. He thinks he is squeezing you for a few $1,000s in rent. He doesn't realize you are holding the leash to his life. Helen looked at the ring. It was no longer just a beautiful object. It was a weapon. By taking the ring from the alley, she hadn't just saved a man's life. She had accidentally stolen a villain's future. The power shift was now complete. Helen Dickson, a woman the system tried to erase, was now the only person who could decide if Chairman Gwon stayed a billionaire or became a ghost. What's the next step? Helen asked, her voice growing steady. We make him watch as his money starts to move, Kang replied. The plan was cold and silent. Kang sat at the kitchen table, his fingers moving across Helen's keyboard like a conductor. He wasn't looking for a way to steal Gwyn's money. He was looking for a way to make the market destroy him. Gwyn's construction company relies on a high stock price to keep his bank loans active, Kang explained. If the price drops, the banks will automatically seize his property as collateral. We are going to help it drop. Using the obsidian ring as a key, Kang opened a secret trading account. It was filled with short positions, bets that a company's value would fall. Every dollar Gwyn had hidden in the ring was now being used to bet against his own empire. I don't understand, Helen said, watching the flickering red numbers on the screen. How does this stop him from knocking down our door? Because in 10 minutes, he won't be able to pay the men at the door, Kang replied. A man with $1 billion is a king. A man with $1 billion in debt is a target. Helen watched as Kang leaked a single, encrypted file to a group of high-stakes investors. It was the structural integrity report she had found earlier, the one showing that Gwyn's new luxury tower was sinking into the mud. As the news hit the private trading boards, the red lines on the screen began to plunge. Gwyn's net worth was tied to the perceived value of that tower. As the stock price tumbled, the system Helen once feared began to turn into a meat grinder. The banks, sensing blood in the water, started sending automated margin calls. They weren't asking for the rent. They were demanding hundreds of millions of dollars that Gwyn no longer had. He's losing millions every second, Helen whispered, her eyes wide. He's losing more than money, Kang said. He's losing the belief that he is untouchable. The men he pays to protect him are watching these same numbers. They know a sinking ship when they see one. By noon, the silent architect and the architectural technician had erased a decade of Gwyn's growth. The power shift was no longer a secret. On the street below, the black cars that usually sat outside Helen's building began to drive away. The mercenaries were leaving because their digital paychecks were bouncing. Helen felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't the girl hiding in the dark anymore. She was the one holding the lever that was crushing a giant. The atmosphere in the room changed when the first black sedan returned, but it wasn't Gwyn's men inside. These cars were silent, matte finish, and bore no license plates. Two men stepped out. They didn't carry weapons. They carried briefcases and encrypted tablets. "My associates have arrived," Kang said, his voice regaining its natural authority. "They are the invisible hands of the market." Gwyn thought he was the shark in this pond, but he didn't realize he was swimming in an ocean owned by others. Kang had signaled his network. These were the Silent Board, a group of international financiers who acted as a shadow bank. To them, Gwyn wasn't a villain. He was a bad investment that needed to be liquidated. They didn't need to break his windows. They just needed to revoke his access to the world. "They are cutting the final lines," Kang explained, showing Helen a screen filled with red flashing icons. "Every credit card Gwyn owns is being declined. His private jet is being grounded for safety violations. Even his health insurance is being flagged for a review. In 60 seconds, he will be a man with no identity and no resources." Helen watched from the window. The power shift was haunting to witness. Gwyn's personal security team, seeing the black sedans and receiving insufficient funds alerts on their phones, simply walked away. They didn't say a word. They just left Gwyn standing alone in the middle of the sidewalk, screaming into a phone that no longer had a dial tone. "He's invisible now," Helen whispered. "He's worse than invisible," Kang replied. "He's a liability. My associates don't like liabilities. They have already contacted the district attorney with a gift-wrapped file of Gwyn's money laundering history. The system he used to crush you is now the cage that will hold him." The Mafia wasn't about the street fight. It was about the total control of information and capital. By saving Kang, Helen had invited a force into her life that dismantled a titan without firing a single shot. The network manipulation was complete. Gwyn was isolated, broke, and officially a fugitive. Helen looked at Marcus, whose breathing had finally returned to a steady, healthy rhythm. The network had ensured the local pharmacy was paid for a year in advance. The squeeze was over. The silence in the hallway was broken by a heavy, desperate pounding. It wasn't the rhythmic knock of a businessman. It was the frantic scratching of a trapped animal. Helen Dickson stood in her kitchen, her hand resting on the laptop. She didn't feel afraid. She felt a strange, cold clarity. "Open the door," Gwyn's voice was cracked and raw. "I know you have it. Give me the ring and I'll give you this building. I'll give you 10 buildings. Helen looked at Kang. He gave a small, sharp nod. She walked to the door and pulled it open. Chairman Gwyn stood there, his expensive silk tie torn, his hair a mess. He looked aged by 20 years. He tried to push his way inside, but he stopped when he saw the 2 men from the black sedan standing behind Kang. "You're too late, Mr. Gwyn," Helen said. Her voice was steady and quiet. "You don't understand," Gwyn hissed, reaching out a trembling hand. "That ring, that data, it's my life. You're just a girl from the Iron District. You don't know how to handle that kind of power." Helen picked up her tablet and turned the screen toward him. It showed a live broadcast of a police press conference. The district attorney was standing in front of Gwyn's corporate headquarters. Yellow tape was being stretched across the glass doors. "I don't need to handle it," Helen replied. "I just needed to let it go. I sent the decryption keys to the National Tax Office 5 minutes ago. Your shadow equity is now public record." Gwyn's phone chimed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes widening. It was a notification from his bank. Every account he owned, personal, corporate, and offshore, had been flagged and frozen for criminal investigation. He tried to swipe the screen, but it went black. His biometric ID had been revoked. "You're a ghost, Gwyn," Kang said from the sofa, his voice like ice. "You used the system to make people invisible. Now the system has decided you no longer exist." Gwyn looked at Helen, his face twisting with rage, then falling into a hollow mask of defeat. He had come here to take her home, but he had lost his own world instead. This was the strategic bluff. He thought he was the one holding the leverage, but he was standing in a trap that had already closed. As the sound of sirens grew louder in the street below, Gwyn turned and ran toward the stairs, but there was nowhere left to go. The Iron District wasn't his playground anymore. It was his prison. The sirens outside were not a threat anymore. They were a clean sweep. From her third-floor window, Helen Dickson watched as federal agents loaded boxes of files from Chairman Gwyn's local office into black vans. The Iron District was waking up to a new reality. The news was already calling it the glass house collapse. "The system is resetting," Kang said, standing slowly from the sofa. His side was still bandaged, but he moved with the grace of a man who had regained his throne. "Gwyn's towers are being seized by the state. Because the land was bought with laundered money, the titles are being voided." This was the justice payoff. Helen sat at her laptop, but she wasn't hiding anymore. Under Kang's guidance, she was working with a group of pro bono lawyers. They were filing a massive class-action lawsuit. Because Gwyn's company had technically ceased to exist, his half-finished luxury buildings were being turned over to a community land trust. "We aren't just stopping the evictions, Marcus," Helen told her brother, who was sitting up and eating a real breakfast for the first time in weeks. "We are becoming the owners. This building, the park across the street, the old warehouse, it all belongs to the neighborhood now." The non-violent dismantling was total. Gwyn hadn't been stopped by a bullet. He had been stopped by a public audit. Every forged safety report Helen had found was now on the front page of the city's biggest newspaper. The structural flaws in his empire were no longer secrets. The banks were forced to pay for the repairs as part of their settlement for helping Gwyn hide his money. "You did more than save a man in an alley, Helen," Kang said, looking at the obsidian ring one last time before slipping it back onto his finger. You exposed the rot in the foundation. Most people just live in the shadows. You decided to turn on the lights. By the afternoon, the black sedans were gone. The silent board had finished their work. Gwyn was in a holding cell, his high-priced lawyers refusing to take his calls because his credit was dead. The man who tried to erase the Iron District was now the one being forgotten by history. Helen looked at her hands. They were the same hands that had scrubbed floors and drafted blueprints, but now they held the keys to the district's future. The strategic trap had worked. The giant was gone, and the people he tried to crush were finally standing tall. The apartment was finally quiet. The hum of the refrigerator felt peaceful instead of haunting. Marcus was sleeping deeply, his breathing clear for the first time in months. Helen Dickson stood by the window, watching the sunrise over a neighborhood that no longer lived in fear of a bulldozer. A soft click sounded behind her. She turned to find the sofa empty. Kang was gone. He had moved like a shadow, leaving no trace of his stay except for a single, heavy envelope on the kitchen table. Helen opened it. Inside was not a stack of cash, but something far more powerful, a legal deed. It wasn't just for her apartment. It was the master title for the entire block, now registered under a non-profit trust in her name. Attached was a small, encrypted thumb drive and a note written in precise, elegant script. "The system is a tool," the note read. "In the wrong hands it is a cage. In yours it is a foundation. Build something that lasts." Helen looked at the thumb drive. She knew what it was. It was a digital backdoor to the city's financial planning committee, the same one Gwyn had used to destroy lives. But instead of using it to steal, Helen realized she could use it to protect. She could monitor the city's plans and ensure no other mogul could ever quietly buy her neighbor's futures again. She walked to the small drawer where she had kept the obsidian ring during the chaos. It was gone, taken by Kang, but in its place sat a small, silver lapel pin in the shape of a drafting compass. It was the symbolic object of her new life. She wasn't just an intern anymore. She was the architect of the Iron District's recovery. The emotional cost had been high. She had lost her anonymity and her simple life. She had seen the cold, dark machinery of the world. But as she pinned the silver compass to her coat, Helen felt a sense of dignity that no amount of money could buy. She stepped out onto her balcony. Down on the street, people were coming out of their homes, talking and laughing without looking over their shoulders. The aftermath wasn't about the destruction of a villain. It was about the reclamation of a home. Helen Dickson looked out at the skyline she had helped redraw, and for the first time she smiled. In the world of high-stakes influence, the loudest man in the room is rarely the one in control. The story of Helen Dickson and the silent architect reminds us that true power isn't found in a fist or a firearm. It's found in the systems that run our world. Chairman Gwyn lost because he underestimated someone he considered invisible. In any system, the person who understands the blueprints has more leverage than the person who owns the bricks. A bullet stops a man, but an audit stops an empire. When you control the flow of information and capital, you don't need to fight. You simply wait for the villain's own greed to bankrupt them. Helen saved a life, but she gained a weapon. In the underworld, a favor is the most expensive currency. Use it wisely and it can buy you a kingdom. Use it poorly and it becomes your cage. The Mafia isn't just a group of men. It is the silent influence moving behind the curtain of everyday life. If you want to survive the squeeze, you have to learn how to play the game before the game plays you. If you're ready to master the blueprints of power and see how the underdogs dismantle the titans, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't just watch the story, study the strategy. This is at Alfred Mafia Stories. We don't just tell tales, we map the system.